Kamala Harris, dressed in a sophisticated yet understated suit, stepped into the private jet with a composed expression, her lips curving into a faint smile. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of relentless meetings, political engagements, and pressing decisions. Now, finally, she had a brief window to breathe. The Maldives, a sun-kissed paradise, was calling her name, promising much-needed relaxation and solitude. The cabin was a masterpiece of luxury, a floating haven designed for comfort. The leather seats were plush, the ambient lighting cast a soft golden hue, and every detail, from the meticulously arranged amenities to the subtle scent of fresh orchids, exuded the elegance of a five-star retreat. Kamala placed her bag in the overhead compartment, took her seat, and exhaled slowly, savoring a rare moment free from the weight of political responsibilities. As she settled in, a flight attendant entered the cabin. She had neat blonde hair tied in a sleek bun and moved with practiced grace, greeting passengers with a warm, professional demeanor. Her name tag read, Emily. Kamala returned the attendant's polite smile, but something in Emily's face shifted as soon as their eyes met. The warmth in her expression dimmed for the briefest second before she quickly masked it, continuing her duties as if nothing had happened. Kamala, always observant, noticed the subtle change. It was fleeting but unmistakable. She offered a polite nod, deciding to let the moment pass, though a quiet curiosity lingered. Emily glanced at the passenger manifest in her hands, her gaze lingering on Kamala's name for a second longer than necessary. Then, without another word, she turned and walked briskly toward the service galley. Shaking off the momentary oddity, Kamala slipped off her shoes and reclined in her seat. She retrieved a book from her bag, intending to lose herself in its pages, but before she could even turn the first page, she felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Across the aisle, a woman in her early 30s with long black hair observed Kamala with a curious yet pleasant expression. Their eyes met briefly. Kamala responded with a gentle smile, and the woman acknowledged her with a small nod before returning to her laptop, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. Meanwhile, Emily re-emerged from the galley. This time, she didn't glance in Kamala's direction. Instead, she moved through the aisle, tending to passengers with an air of practiced attentiveness, asking about their needs with a genuine touch of care. But when she finally reached Kamala's seat, her demeanor subtly changed. She placed a glass of water on Kamala's tray with a noticeable clink, no greeting, no words. Kamala arched an eyebrow but remained composed. She picked up the glass, offering a gracious smile. "Thank you, that's very thoughtful of you." Emily's response was a strange, unreadable smile before she swiftly turned and walked away. Kamala's instincts whispered that something was off. This wasn't mere indifference or an oversight, there was an intentionality to it. But why? An hour into the flight, Kamala found herself unable to fully relax. She sipped her water, redirecting her attention across the aisle. The woman who had been watching her earlier now stood and walked over. "I hope I'm not intruding," the woman whispered. "I'm Sarah. I couldn't help but notice, the flight attendant, Emily, she seems different towards you." Kamala smiled politely, though a cautious undertone remained. "She's just doing her job." Sarah hesitated, glancing around before lowering her voice further. "I overheard her talking to another flight attendant in the galley. Something about you. It didn't sound right." Kamala's expression remained pleasant, but beneath it, her mind sharpened. "Thank you, Sarah. I'll keep that in mind." As Sarah returned to her seat, Kamala leaned back, eyes half closed, but her thoughts raced. The pieces weren't adding up. Emily's conduct wasn't a simple cold attitude, it was something deeper. And now, with Sarah's words confirming her suspicions, Kamala knew she had to stay vigilant. When Kamala glanced up again, she caught Emily staring from the galley. Their eyes met for only a fraction of a second, but the iciness in Emily's gaze was undeniable. Kamala inhaled slowly, keeping her composure. Whatever was happening, she would uncover the truth in due time. Emily soon returned to the aisle, this time carrying a tray of beverages. "Orange juice or green tea?" she asked, her voice honeyed as she served a businessman in the row ahead. But when she reached Kamala, the warmth faded. She placed a glass on Kamala's tray with another sharp clink, her voice flat. "This is your drink." Kamala looked up, her expression calm but inquisitive. "Thank you." Emily said nothing, her eyes lingering for a beat before she turned away. Around them, a few passengers subtly observed the interaction, sensing the unspoken tension. Across the aisle, Sarah leaned forward slightly. "You saw that, right? She's not just being rude, she's being deliberate." Kamala set her glass down. "Perhaps it's been a long workday," she replied smoothly, though she knew better. Sarah's eyes narrowed. As a human rights lawyer, she had spent years reading between the lines of prejudice and hostility. And Emily's behavior was not sitting right with her. Minutes later, Emily reappeared. This time, she had no tray, just a passenger manifest in hand. She stopped beside Kamala's seat and crossed her arms. "Are you sure you booked this flight properly?" Her tone was clipped, almost accusatory. Heads turned. The sudden challenge drew the attention of surrounding passengers, their expressions shifting from curiosity to discomfort. Kamala didn't flinch. "My office handled the booking, and my documents were verified upon boarding. If there's an issue, I'd be happy to clarify." Emily's expression remained rigid. "I just want to ensure that everyone here is where they're supposed to be." Kamala placed her book down, her gaze unwavering. "If you have a specific concern, I'd appreciate it if you addressed it directly." For a moment, Emily seemed to weigh her next move. Then, with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, she turned and walked away. But before she did, she cast a brief glance at Sarah. Sarah, now visibly frustrated, leaned closer. "Do you need my help? You shouldn't have to deal with this alone." Kamala smiled, touched by the offer. "Thank you, but I'd like to see where this goes." As Sarah returned to her seat, she discreetly slipped a folded note onto Kamala's tray table. Kamala unfolded it and read the simple, urgent message, "Be careful. I think she's up to something." A quiet tension settled in Kamala's chest. She tucked the note away, her thoughts swirling. Was this about power, bias, or something even more insidious? From the galley, hushed voices carried fragments of conversation. "Not safe. Do something. Report." Kamala kept her expression neutral, but across the aisle, Sarah's concerned eyes met hers. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered. "I think they're targeting you." Kamala gave a small, measured nod. "I did. But let's allow them to continue. The truth will come out." Moments later, Emily re-entered the cabin, this time with an unmistakable shift in demeanor. Holding the passenger manifest, she stopped beside Kamala's seat once more. "I need to verify your booking documents again. Just a routine check." Kamala's gaze met hers, calm yet unwavering. "I already presented them upon boarding. If there's an issue, I suggest you take it up with the captain or flight supervisor." Kamala Harris stepped into the private jet, the weight of countless political engagements still lingering on her shoulders. Her tailored suit was crisp, her demeanor poised, but there was a flicker of exhaustion in her eyes. This trip to the Maldives was supposed to be a brief respite, a moment to breathe away from the unrelenting pace of Washington. As she settled into her seat, the hum of the aircraft provided a temporary sense of calm. The cabin was designed for luxury, soft leather seats, warm ambient lighting, and an atmosphere curated for comfort. She exhaled, letting herself sink into the moment. A flight attendant moved through the aisle, greeting passengers with a polite smile. When her gaze fell upon Kamala, however, something shifted. The warm professionalism faded, replaced by something less inviting. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Kamala caught it instantly. The flight attendant, Emily, hesitated before turning quickly, disappearing into the galley. Kamala noted the reaction but chose not to dwell on it. Years in politics had taught her to recognize these small tells, microaggressions wrapped in feigned courtesy. She reached for the book in her bag, determined to lose herself in its pages, but a quiet awareness had settled in her mind. Across the aisle, another passenger watched with interest. A woman in her early 30s, with long, dark hair and an inquisitive expression, studied Kamala with barely concealed curiosity. Their eyes met briefly. Kamala offered a polite smile, and the woman returned a small nod before focusing on her laptop. Minutes later, Emily re-emerged, weaving through the cabin, offering drinks and tending to passengers with visible attentiveness, except when she reached Kamala. Without a word, she placed a glass of water on the tray in front of her, the clink of the glass against the table slightly sharper than necessary. Kamala met her eyes, her expression unreadable. "Thank you," she said, her voice calm but deliberate. Emily responded with a tight-lipped smile, turning away swiftly. The unease that had started as a whisper in Kamala's mind grew louder. Something was off. She took a sip of water, watching as Emily moved through the cabin, her manner changing noticeably depending on whom she was serving. An hour into the flight, the tension thickened. The woman across the aisle leaned in slightly, her voice a whisper. "I don't mean to intrude, but I overheard something in the galley. That flight attendant, she was talking about you. And not in a good way." Kamala set her book aside. "What did she say?" "She said something about making sure you don't cause trouble. It didn't sit right with me." Kamala absorbed the words, her expression unchanging. "Thank you for telling me." The woman nodded. "I'm Sarah, by the way." "Kamala," she replied, though she knew Sarah already recognized her. Emily returned once more, this time with a small file folder in her hands. She stopped beside Kamala's seat, arms crossed. "Mrs. Harris, I need to see your booking documents again." Kamala arched an eyebrow. "I provided them when I boarded. Is there a problem?" Emily's lips curled in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just a routine check." "I see. And are you requesting the same from all passengers?" The silence that followed was telling. A few heads turned, listening intently. "This is for everyone's safety," Emily said, her voice quieter but edged with something sharper. "Not everyone belongs everywhere." A hush fell over the cabin. Sarah straightened in her seat. "Excuse me," she said, her voice firm. "That is not standard procedure." Emily's expression remained unreadable, but the tension between them was now impossible to ignore. Before Kamala could respond, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to unforeseen circumstances, we will be making an emergency landing. Please remain seated." Kamala's grip on her book tightened. This was no coincidence. When the plane touched down at a small, unfamiliar airport, Emily returned, her voice devoid of pretense. "Mrs. Harris, I need you to collect your belongings. You'll be disembarking here." A wave of disbelief rippled through the passengers. Sarah shot to her feet. "This is an abuse of power. You have no right." Emily cut her off. "Ma'am, sit down." "I will not. This is blatant discrimination, and we all see it." The murmurs among the passengers grew louder. An older man spoke up. "She's done nothing wrong. This isn't right." Kamala remained seated for a moment longer, meeting Emily's gaze with quiet defiance. Then, with deliberate movements, she gathered her things. As she reached the exit, Sarah leaned in. "I'll testify to this. They won't get away with it." Kamala offered her a grateful smile. "Thank you. But trust me, I won't let this go." She stepped off the plane, the night air wrapping around her as the aircraft taxied away. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The fight was far from over, and Kamala Harris had never been one to back down. Lifting the receiver, she clung to a faint hope that it might still work, but all she heard was the static hum of a disconnected line. With a deep sigh, she placed the receiver back, sat down on one of the plastic chairs, her hands resting on her suitcase, and her gaze fixed on the void before her. Pulling out her cell phone again, she was once again greeted by the cold, unyielding words, "No service." Kamala squinted, wondering whether the lack of signal was due to the remoteness of the area or deliberate interference. She checked again, but the result remained unchanged. A heavy silence filled the space around her, amplifying her sense of isolation. Outside, the sun began to set, its golden glow yielding to encroaching darkness. Kamala knew she couldn't stay at the airport much longer. The area seemed unsecured, and she had no way of knowing if it would be safe once night fell. Rising to her feet, she grabbed her suitcase and stepped back outside, this time heading toward a narrow path leading away from the airport. The shadow of the distant forest seemed to swallow the trail ahead. With no other options, Kamala turned on the flashlight, her only find in the abandoned office, and began walking. Her footsteps crunched against the dry ground, blending with the rustling sounds of the forest. Each gust of wind set the leaves whispering, creating the eerie impression of being watched. Kamala glanced over her shoulder a few times but saw nothing beyond the enveloping darkness. Still, a sense of unease clung to her, quickening her heartbeat. About 20 minutes in, she heard a faint sound behind her. It wasn't the wind or the swaying branches, it was footsteps. She stopped, turned, and shone her flashlight into the darkness behind her. Nothing. Just the empty trail and the thick bushes flanking the sides. But she knew she wasn't alone. Forcing herself to stay calm, Kamala resumed walking, now slower and more attuned to every sound around her. When a faint light appeared in the distance, relief washed over her. It was the glow of small houses clustered at the edge of the forest. As she approached, the sounds of life reached her, laughter, children playing, and the soft melodies of folk songs carried by the air. She exhaled deeply and stepped into the village. The villagers, curious yet warm, quickly gathered around her. A tall, kind-faced man stepped forward, his voice steady and welcoming. "Ma'am," he said, "you look like you've had a tough journey. Is everything all right?" Kamala managed a faint smile, though exhaustion was evident. "I was left stranded at the nearby airport. I need to contact my office, but there's no phone service there." The man nodded, his expression sympathetic. "The signal here isn't great either, but you're welcome to rest for the night. We'll help you in the morning." Kamala was led to a small house where the villagers brought her food and water. An elderly woman, seemingly the community caregiver, gently tended to the minor scratches on Kamala's legs. Meanwhile, a young girl, about 12 years old with bright, eager eyes, approached her. "You're Kamala Harris, aren't you?" the girl asked, her voice trembling with excitement. "I've seen you on TV. You're amazing. I want to grow up and be just like you." Kamala's smile softened, her eyes warm as they met the girl's. "Thank you, Asha. But you're already strong. I believe you can do anything you set your mind to." Asha grasped Kamala's hand tightly, her eyes shining with determination. "But you're here all alone. Did something bad happen?" Kamala nodded gently. "Yes, Asha, but I'm okay. I believe that the truth always prevails, and I won't let anyone get away with doing wrong without facing the consequences." That night, Kamala lay on a simple bed in the small house. The soft glow of an oil lamp on the table calmed her, but her mind buzzed with thoughts. From the events on the plane to Emily's blatant hostility and the suspicious emergency landing, Kamala knew this was no coincidence. Something bigger was at play, and she was determined to uncover it. Outside, the sound of crickets blended with the gentle rustling of the wind. But within Kamala's heart, peace was fleeting. She knew the real battle was yet to come. The morning in the small village began with serene sounds, roosters crowing in the distance, children running and laughing, and the murmurs of soft conversations. Kamala woke up in a modest room, sunlight gently streaming through the window. Though still weary from the exhausting journey, her eyes gleamed with determination. This was not just a disrupted trip, it was an opportunity to stand up against injustice. The villagers, with their warmth and hospitality, had prepared breakfast for her. During the meal, Jamal, the village chief, approached with important news. "We've managed to contact an acquaintance in a nearby town," he said, his voice kind yet purposeful. "They can help you reach a place with a phone signal. We'll take you there whenever you're ready." Kamala smiled, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you, Jamal. Your kindness is something I'll never forget." After several hours in an old pickup truck, Kamala reached a small town where she finally found a phone signal. She immediately called her office. Her assistant, Kevin, answered, his voice filled with concern. "Kamala, finally, you called. We've been worried sick since yesterday. What happened?" Kamala took a steadying breath. "I'll explain everything when I'm back, but right now, I need you to prepare for a press conference. This isn't just personal, it's a fight we can't afford to ignore." Hours later, Kamala arrived at a major airport in Washington, where Kevin and her legal team were waiting. The car ride back to her office was tense, filled with frustration and resolve. Even Kevin, usually the calmest person in the room, couldn't hide his anger. The airline issued a statement, Kevin said, his tone sharp with sarcasm. They claimed it was a routine safety decision by the flight crew. Kamala raised an eyebrow. "Did they think I'll fall for that empty excuse? We have evidence. Witnesses. They can't hide forever." Kevin nodded. "I've contacted Sarah, the passenger who stood up for you on the flight. She's willing to testify. Plus, another passenger recorded the entire incident. Their video is going viral on social media." Kamala leaned back in her seat, her eyes burning with resolve. "Good. We won't let this fade away. This is our chance to speak up for those who can't." The next day, a major press conference was held outside Kamala's office. Reporters from across the country gathered, cameras trained on the podium. Kamala stepped out in a dark suit, exuding confidence, though her indignation was palpable. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, Her voice rang with conviction, unwavering despite the weight of the moment. "Yesterday, I experienced something no one, absolutely no one, should have to endure. On a flight to the Maldives, I was insulted, targeted, and ultimately removed from the plane without a valid reason." She paused, her sharp gaze sweeping across the sea of reporters and flashing cameras. This was not just an act of discrimination. It was a symptom of a system that abuses its power. A system that believes it can act without consequence. Her words carried weight, resonating with the crowd and the millions watching the live-streamed press conference. Within hours, the hashtag Justice for Kamala was trending on social media, drawing support from political leaders, activists, and ordinary citizens alike. The pressure on the airline intensified. Desperate to contain the fallout, they issued a statement denying responsibility, claiming that Emily, the flight attendant, had acted alone. But the public wasn't buying it. Investigative journalists dug deeper and uncovered damning evidence. Emily had acted under direct orders from a senior airline executive with political motivations. This revelation sent shockwaves through the media. Kamala and her legal team seized the opportunity, filing a lawsuit against the airline for discrimination, harassment, and abuse of power. Sarah and other passengers, including the one who had recorded the viral video, pledged to testify. "We're not just suing for my dignity," Kamala declared in a primetime interview. "We're suing to ensure no one else has to go through this." That evening, as she sifted through legal documents in her office, Kevin burst in, his expression electrified. "Kamala, we just got a major tip," he said, handing her a folder. "Another flight attendant from your flight has come forward. She claims Emily was acting on direct orders from higher-ups." Kamala's eyes darkened as she skimmed through the testimony. "Which higher-up?" "An airline executive," Kevin explained. "According to her statement, he has political connections. He didn't want you on that flight." Kamala placed the folder on her desk, her fingers curling into fists. "So this isn't just discrimination. It's a conspiracy." She exhaled slowly, then lifted her chin. "And we're going to expose it." The following week, the courtroom was packed. Outside, supporters lined the steps, their signs raised high. "Justice for Kamala, end discrimination, no more abuse of power." As she stepped out of the car, cheers erupted, camera flashes illuminating the determined expression on her face. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Emily sat on the defendant's side, her hands clenched together, her face pale. Beside her, the airline's legal team looked composed but wary, aware that the world was watching. Kamala's attorney, a formidable woman known for her expertise in human rights law, began her opening statement. "Your Honor, we are here today not just to restore my client's dignity, but to hold accountable those who believe they are above the law. What happened to Mrs. Harris was not just an unfortunate incident, it was a calculated act of discrimination. This case is about more than one woman. It is about every person who has ever been unjustly silenced." The prosecution wasted no time presenting their first piece of evidence, the now infamous viral video. The courtroom fell into an eerie silence as Emily's voice echoed through the speakers, "You don't belong here." The airline's attorneys tried to argue that Emily was simply following protocol, but their defense crumbled as witnesses took the stand. Sarah was first. She recounted the event in painstaking detail, her voice steady and firm. There was no justification for Kamala's removal. None. This was blatant discrimination, and I knew I couldn't stay silent. A second passenger, the one who recorded the video, followed. "I was seated nearby," he testified. "Kamala did nothing wrong. That flight attendant targeted her from the start." But the most shocking moment came when a second flight attendant, who had initially been too afraid to speak, stepped forward. Her hands trembled, but her voice was resolute. "I overheard everything," she said. "The executive gave direct orders through our internal communication system. He said, 'Handle Mrs. Harris.' Emily was just following instructions. I wanted to say something, but I was scared. I'm not scared anymore." The courtroom rippled with murmurs. This was no longer about one rogue employee. This was an orchestrated attack. Kamala's team then presented internal emails showing that high-ranking airline officials had discussed her removal before the flight even took off. In her closing argument, Kamala's attorney addressed the jury with unwavering intensity. "This case is not just about one woman's dignity. It is about power. Abuse of power. The belief that one can act unjustly and escape accountability. We must send a message today that no one is above the law. The jury deliberated for only a few hours before delivering their verdict. The airline and Emily were found guilty of discrimination, harassment, and abuse of power. The airline was ordered to pay a substantial fine and implement extensive anti-discrimination training. Emily was fired on the spot, and the executives responsible were placed under investigation. As Kamala stepped out of the courthouse, the crowd erupted in cheers. She climbed onto a podium, her voice carrying over the throng of supporters. Today, justice has prevailed. But this is only the beginning. We will not stop until no one has to endure what I did. Injustice must always be confronted. The roar of the crowd was deafening. People across the world watched, inspired by her fight. Kamala Harris had not only won a personal battle, but she had ignited a movement. That evening, back in her office, Kamala stood by her window, gazing at the city lights. She knew this was a turning point, not just for her, but for the countless others who had ever faced discrimination. This fight wasn't over. It never would be. But for now, at least, she had won. And she would keep fighting, no matter what came next. They thought I would back down, Kamala thought, but this is only the beginning. After her resounding courtroom victory, Kamala Harris' fight did not end with a high-profile lawsuit. Her case had evolved into a symbol of resistance against injustice and systemic discrimination. News outlets, social media, and television programs continued covering every development, and waves of support for Kamala spread across the country and beyond. But Kamala understood that this was merely the beginning. Her goal was never just to win for herself but to create lasting change. She wanted her victory to ignite a movement. Immediately after the trial concluded, Kamala called a meeting with her team in a large conference room, the walls lined with legal documents, reports, and proposals. She stood before a whiteboard, her presence commanding the attention of every person in the room. Kevin, her trusted assistant, was there, along with her legal team, longtime advisors, and activists who had been following her journey. This victory is just the first step, she declared, her voice steady. If we stop now, all of this will be reduced to a single headline. We have to seize this momentum and push for real, lasting change. Kevin nodded. We've been reviewing policy proposals. If we collaborate with lawmakers, we could push for new anti-discrimination laws across service industries, particularly in aviation. Kamala's eyes gleamed with determination. Not only that, she added, but we also need to educate the public about their rights. So many people endure mistreatment because they don't know how to fight back. This is an opportunity to shift the way people see their power. Linda, a senior advisor, chimed in, we should create an online platform where people can share their experiences, connect with legal experts, and seek help. Kamala nodded. Brilliant. Let's make it happen. Meanwhile, Kamala's story continued to dominate headlines. A week after the trial, she appeared on a nationally televised program, eager viewers hanging on her every word. The host, a seasoned journalist, asked, Ms. Harris, your case has inspired millions. What message do you hope people take from your journey? Kamala sat upright, her gaze unwavering. This victory isn't just mine, she said. It belongs to everyone who has suffered discrimination but felt voiceless. It's proof that standing up and fighting back can lead to justice. The host leaned in. What do you believe is the biggest lesson from this experience? Kamala smiled faintly, her voice calm yet resolute. The biggest lesson is that no one has the right to make you feel unworthy. No matter who you are or where you come from, you deserve fairness and respect. Following the interview, messages, emails, and handwritten letters flooded Kamala's office. Each letter told a story, each voice carrying the weight of injustice and the hope of change. A young woman wrote, I was denied service at a restaurant because of my skin color. I didn't know how to fight back, but your story gave me the courage to stand up for myself. An elderly man's letter read, I stayed silent for years, thinking the injustices I faced didn't matter. You reminded me that every voice has the power to bring change. Kamala read each one, her heart heavy with their pain yet lifted by their resolve. This was no longer just about her, it was about the countless people who needed a champion. Determined to expand her impact, Kamala founded a nonprofit organization called Justice for All. The initiative focused on defending victims of discrimination, educating the public on their rights, and advocating for equitable policies. At its launch event, Kamala stood before a packed auditorium, filled with activists, lawmakers, and supporters. Her voice echoed through the room. "Justice for all is more than just an organization," she declared. "It's a commitment. We will not turn our backs on the vulnerable. We will fight to build a society where everyone is treated with dignity, without exception." The crowd erupted in applause, many moved to tears by the sincerity in her voice. Meanwhile, the airline that had been at the center of the lawsuit faced mounting pressure. Public scrutiny forced them to issue a formal apology, and several top executives were removed from their positions. Comprehensive reforms were implemented, including mandatory anti-discrimination training. Other airlines took note, swiftly revising their own policies to avoid facing a similar scandal. One evening, as Kamala worked late in her office, her phone buzzed with a video call request. It was Asha, the young girl from the village where Kamala had once felt abandoned. Asha's face appeared on the screen, her eyes shining with excitement. "Ms. Kamala, I wanted to thank you," she said. "Because of you, I've decided what I want to do. I want to become a lawyer, just like you and Sarah. I want to help people who are treated unfairly." Kamala's eyes softened with pride. "You can do it, Asha. I believe in you. And when the time comes, I'll be here to support you." Later that night, Kamala stood by her window, gazing out at the shimmering city skyline. She sipped her tea, savoring the rare moment of peace. Her battle had become something far greater than herself. She had ignited a movement, a beacon for those who had once felt powerless. "They thought I would falter," she reflected, her expression steadfast. "But they didn't realize, this is only the beginning of a fairer future." With each step forward, Kamala's influence grew. The Justice for All initiative gained traction, attracting financial backing from donors, businesses, and civil rights organizations. Within weeks, thousands of volunteers joined the cause, eager to be part of the movement. One morning, Kevin entered Kamala's office, a thick folder in his hands. "We've received over 2,000 requests for legal assistance in just the past 2 weeks," he said. "People are reaching out about workplace discrimination, being denied services because of their race, and facing abuses of power." Kamala flipped through the folder, her heart aching at the sheer volume of injustice. A woman had been fired for being pregnant. A young man was refused employment for being transgender. She closed the folder, her grip tightening. "We need to act now," she said. "Kevin, assemble the legal team and prioritize the most urgent cases. No one should feel powerless for another second." Kevin nodded and left the room. Kamala turned back to the window, watching the early morning light spread over the city. "We may not change everything overnight," she murmured to herself. "But every fight, every voice, every step forward makes a difference." To amplify their message, Kamala and her team began organizing community forums across major cities. At each event, she not only shared her story but also listened, truly listened, to the voices of those who had suffered in silence. One of the largest gatherings took place in Chicago, where thousands arrived to stand in solidarity. As Kamala took the stage, she surveyed the sea of faces before her. The weight of their struggles, their hopes, their expectations, it was all there. She took a deep breath, her voice resolute yet full of emotion. "I stand here today not just for myself. I stand for everyone who has been treated unfairly, for everyone whose voice has been dismissed. But remember this, we are not alone. Together, we can fight and change the world." Kamala's voice echoed through the packed auditorium, her words carrying weight beyond the stage. A brief pause followed as she scanned the faces before her. "This journey will not be easy, but it is worth it. Every step we take is a beacon of light in the darkness." The audience erupted into applause, a young woman in the front row clutching her friend's hand, tears streaming down her face. "She's not just speaking for herself," she whispered. "She's speaking for all of us." Justice for All continued to gain momentum. Lawyers from across the country volunteered their time, offering free legal assistance for urgent cases. Large corporations pledged to improve their anti-discrimination policies and fund education programs. The movement was no longer just an initiative, it was a revolution. Sarah, the lawyer who had stood by Kamala's side during the trial, now played a critical role as one of the organization's key advisors. In a strategy meeting, she put forth a bold idea. We need to launch human rights training programs in schools and workplaces. Many people don't even realize they have rights, let alone know how to protect them. Kamala nodded. That's an excellent idea. Let's begin with the most vulnerable communities and expand from there. Meanwhile, political leaders took notice. Kamala was invited to advise on a groundbreaking piece of legislation, the Comprehensive Fairness Act. The bill aimed to eliminate discrimination in service industries, protect marginalized groups, and impose strict penalties on those who abuse positions of power. Sitting in a congressional meeting room, she made her case to lawmakers. We need a system that not only protects but also promotes equality. No one should live in fear simply because they are different. Let's make this bill more than just words on paper, let's make it a tool for real change. The movement's impact extended far beyond U.S. borders. One morning, as Kamala sat at her desk, Kevin walked in, a letter in hand. Kamala, you need to see this. It was an email from a young woman in India. Dear Ms. Kamala, your story changed my life. I used to believe I wasn't strong enough to speak up. After being denied a job just because I'm a woman, I felt powerless. But when I read about you, I decided not to remain silent. Now, I have the job I was once denied. Thank you for giving me hope. Kamala swallowed hard, emotions welling inside her. This was why she fought. Every battle, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, it was all worth it if it meant inspiring others to stand up for themselves. As her influence grew, Kamala was honored with the Justice Trailblazer Award. Standing before a packed hall, she accepted the award with a heartfelt speech. This award is not just for me, it's for everyone who has ever found the courage to speak out despite fear. I promise to keep fighting, not just for myself, but for all of us. The audience rose to their feet in applause, a powerful moment of solidarity. Late one evening, Kamala stood on the balcony of her office, looking over the glowing cityscape. The victories were encouraging, but she knew the road ahead was long. We've come so far, she thought, gripping the railing. But there's still so much to do. Justice for all expanded beyond the United States, inspiring justice movements around the world. Kamala's story was translated into multiple languages, shared across social media, and featured in international publications. The world was watching. Then, one day, Kevin burst into the office, barely containing his excitement. Kamala, you've just been invited to speak at the United Nations Human Rights Summit. The room fell silent for a moment before breaking into cheers. Kamala closed her eyes, letting the significance sink in. This was more than an honor. It was an opportunity to take the fight for justice to a global stage. A month later, she stood at the podium at the UN Summit in Geneva. The vast auditorium was filled with world leaders, activists, and scholars from every corner of the globe. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice steady and powerful. My story is not unique. I am one of millions who have faced injustice. But I was fortunate, I had the chance to fight back. Today, I am not here to tell my story. I am here to speak for those who cannot. She continued, we live in a world where injustice knows no borders. Discrimination, abuse of power, and emotional violence exist everywhere. Our mission is not only to heal but to prevent. And to do that, we must act now. As she finished, the room erupted into a standing ovation. Leaders from across the world approached her, eager to collaborate on global human rights initiatives. Kamala didn't stop at speeches. She partnered with international organizations, joined advisory councils, and spearheaded projects across continents. One of her most ambitious initiatives was the Global Justice Network, a platform connecting human rights organizations worldwide to share resources and strategies. At a conference in Nairobi, she met a young woman named Asha. Kamala immediately recognized her, it was the same girl from the village where she had once been left behind. Now a grown woman, Asha was a lawyer, fighting for human rights in Kenya. Miss Kamala, she said, eyes bright with admiration, because of you, I found my voice. I want to thank you for inspiring me and so many others. Kamala placed a hand on her shoulder, smiling. No, Asha, you're the one who stood up and fought. You're the proof that we can change the world if we dare to dream and take action. Back in the US, Justice for All expanded its impact, opening community centers in multiple states. These centers provided free legal counseling, human rights workshops, and support for those seeking justice. One of their greatest achievements was the passage of the Comprehensive Justice Act, a landmark bill ensuring protection from discrimination in workplaces and public services. At the White House signing ceremony, Kamala stood beside the president, overwhelmed with pride. "This is not just a victory for those who have faced injustice," she said in her speech. "It is a declaration that we, as a society, will not tolerate inequality in any form." Shortly after, Kamala was invited to publish a book titled Light in the Darkness, chronicling her journey from a single court case to a worldwide movement. The book became a bestseller, igniting discussions on justice and equality across the world. In interviews, Kamala was often asked if she ever imagined her story would reach such heights. She would smile and reply, "I never fought for recognition. I fought for change. And as long as there's more to be done, I will keep fighting." Her journey was far from over, but with every battle won, she proved that one person's fight for justice could spark a movement that changed the world. As Kamala Harris' story continued to spread across the globe, it was no longer just about a legal victory, it became a movement, a rallying cry for justice. Her influence grew beyond the borders of the United States, igniting conversations in boardrooms, classrooms, and grassroots organizations worldwide. Justice for all expanded at an unprecedented rate, with new chapters forming in various countries, each dedicated to eradicating discrimination and empowering marginalized voices. One evening, as Kamala sat in her office, she reflected on the countless letters and messages she had received. Among them was a note from a young girl in South Africa. It read, "Miss Kamala, because of you, I stood up for myself when my teacher treated me unfairly. I was scared, but I remembered your story. Thank you for showing me that my voice matters." Kamala felt a surge of emotion, realizing that the seeds of change she had planted were blossoming in the hearts of people she had never even met. Determined to expand her impact, Kamala and her team launched the Global Justice Initiative, a program aimed at educating communities on their rights and providing legal aid to those in need. Through partnerships with international organizations, they developed training programs for law enforcement, educators, and service industry professionals, ensuring that awareness and prevention became integral parts of societal structures. Amid these successes, Kamala was invited to speak at the International Human Rights Summit in Geneva. As she stepped onto the stage, the weight of her journey settled on her shoulders. She took a deep breath and addressed the audience, "We are not here to talk about what has been done. We are here to decide what we will do next. Justice is not just a concept, it is a responsibility. And that responsibility belongs to all of us." The room erupted in applause, and in that moment, Kamala knew they were on the cusp of something truly transformative. Back in the U.S., Justice for All established community centers across multiple states, offering free legal aid, educational resources, and support networks. The organization's efforts culminated in the passage of the Comprehensive Justice Act, a landmark piece of legislation aimed at eliminating systemic discrimination. At the bill's signing, Kamala stood beside the president, feeling an overwhelming sense of pride and gratitude. "This is not just a victory for those who have faced injustice," she declared, "it is a testament to what we can achieve when we stand together." Kamala's influence extended beyond activism. She authored a book titled Light in the Darkness, chronicling her journey and the stories of those who had inspired her along the way. The book became a bestseller, translated into multiple languages, and used in classrooms and advocacy training programs worldwide. It was more than just a memoir, it was a guide for anyone seeking to challenge injustice. One late evening, as Kamala gazed out over the city from her office balcony, she held a letter from a 10-year-old girl in Brazil. "Dear Miss Kamala," it read, "I want to be like you. I want to help people feel respected and loved." The words brought tears to her eyes, a reminder that the fight for justice was far from over. As the wind carried the sounds of the city below, she looked up at the stars, feeling the light of new hopes being kindled. "This isn't just my story," she thought. "This is our story. And I won't stop until justice reaches everyone, everywhere." Kamala Harris' journey reminds us that monumental change often starts with small actions, daring to speak up, daring to take the first step, even when the road ahead seems daunting. Justice doesn't happen naturally, it is the result of perseverance, courage, and the power of unity. Each of us has the ability to make a difference, no matter how small. If this story has touched you, share it as a positive message with your community. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue following inspiring stories and the ongoing fight for justice. Join us in turning small steps today into a brighter future for all.